This video is brought to you by John Robson Guitar Tuition. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting the channel by enrolling on a course, purchasing some guitar lessons or a t-shirt, or you can join my Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, I do hope you're well. Now, last week, in the Top 5 Tuesday slot, I talked about my top 5 70s, I was going to say rock albums at the time, but one of them was a bit of a stretch to call it a rock album. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, that's more of a blues album. So I came out with my top 5 favourite 70s guitar albums, and we're pretty much motoring on in much the same vein this week. The only difference is we're talking about the 80s this week. Now, there's probably going to be one or two albums that you would expect to be on any list, any compilation of great 80s guitar albums that might be conspicuous by their absence in my list. But these are my tastes, and, you know, it is what it is. So let's get cracking straight away with
Victims of the Future.
Yeah, hugely important album for me, this one. Gary Moore's Victims of the Future. It is the album where I discovered Gary Moore, basically. I discovered his playing. This was my first real exposure to him as a guitarist. I was living in sort of college halls of residence at the time. It was a naval college, so they weren't called halls of residence, they were called decks, and I was in A deck. We called ourselves the A team. Yeah, how cheesy is that? But anyway, the guy who owned the boombox in A deck was a massive fan of Gary Moore, and he was always playing this cassette, and it just kind of fed into me via osmosis. I'd already kind of got acquainted with rock music in the late 70s via, you know, Judas Priest, Living After Midnight, and Rainbow, Since You've Been Gone, and even a little bit of, you know, Black Sabbath, Never Say Die. That was sort of where I started to gain an appreciation for rock music. But then rock just seemed to go a bit silly. You know, in the early 80s, it seemed to start kind of, well, put it this way, I'm not really interested in any rock star who spends more time in the hairdressers than me granny. Let's put it like that. It all became about, you know, the kind of hair metal, I guess. And I just sort of went back off and went back into me blues and rock and roll roots, if you like. And then I heard this album, and there was just something buried deep in the DNA of Gary's playing that made me think, yeah, this guy it sounds like he's a blues player, really, at heart. And I wonder what it'd be like if he was to play some blues. And of course, later on, we all found out, you know, still got the blues and all of that. But this was the album which introduced me to my probably favourite all-time ever guitar player. So that's why this one has to be on the list. Next.
Alchemy.
Yeah, talking about college, this album was another album that I think just about everybody I was at college with owned. You know, some people had the cassette of it. Some people had the vinyl. You know, there was in one of the decks there was a guy who had a really nice hi-fi system, and you know he used to have the vinyl of this. And you know, it was always a good place, that little room, to go and have an illicit tipple. You know, kind of as long as you weren't too obvious about it, you could always kind of have the odd beer in the halls of residence, in the decks, and this was always the place to hang out. And yeah, many times listening to this live Dire Straits album. For me, if you want a best of Dire Straits album, this is the album to have, because it's fortunate enough that it's before the whole Brothers in Arms kind of era of Dire Straits, which I tried to like. I really did. They were one of my favourite bands at the time, but I could never quite get there. It just sounded so different from, you know, the what I thought of as a classic Dire Straits sound. Yeah, and so all of that kind of first album, Communique, Making Movies, Love Over Gold, all of the great songs from those albums for me, the definitive versions of those songs are the versions on this live album here. It is, unlike a lot of live albums, completely live. It's all just as it was heard on the night at the Hammersmith Odeon, as it was called back then. Was it these days the Apollo or something? But it was recorded live over a couple of nights at the Hammersmith Odeon, and what the crowd heard on the night is what you hear when you listen to this album. Mark Knopfler's playing on this album is just absolutely sublime, and when you listen to this album through headphones and just kind of get a feel for how tight they were as a band, it's absolutely jaw-droppingly good. I love this album. I love Dire Straits as a band, and if I had to choose one of their albums and only one to listen to, for the rest of time, this would be the one. That's why it's on the list. Next.
Surfing with the Alien.
Okay, instrumental rock guitar, Joe Satriani, Surfing with the Alien. This came out at a time when, if you read the guitar magazines, mainly like Guitar Player, that was the main one that I used to get back then, then everybody was, basically trying to be Yngwie. Everybody, there was always some new, pseudo neoclassical metal guitarist on the scene, and Vinnie Moore springs to mind there, and I quite like him, but none of that stuff for me as a blues guitarist, which is what I am first and foremost, none of that stuff felt attainable, achievable, and it just felt like I could appreciate it, but it wasn't really stuff that floated my boat. I like blues, and when you listen to this album, well, when I first listened to it back in, when was it, 87, I think it was like, this is blues. This is shredding, heavy kind of instrumental rock metal blues, but it's still got blues at its core. You could take any of the licks from Surfing with the Alien, from the main melody, and put them into, a 12-bar blues solo and get away with it. I know, because I've done it. It's just that whole kind of 80s thing as well, of like sweep picking and the really sort of fast Al Di Meola alternate picking and stuff like that. I've always been a little bit weak on those techniques, it has to be said. I prefer like the kind of slithery kind of legato stuff and a bit of tapping to move around the neck quickly. And I don't know, maybe I was feeling like, well, I should really learn to do it, that difficult way, using the fast alternate picking. And then along comes Joe, and he's slithering around the neck, doing legato sort of stuff, and it made me think, oh, okay, so my way of doing it is acceptable, is it? Okay, this guy's doing it, so that makes it okay. And, again, unusually for, a shreddy guitar album, Joe wasn't on a mission to keep the melody a secret from the listener. It's full of melodic hooks, this album. You listen to it today and like the kind of 1980s, on a shoestring budget drum programming does kind of make you kind of smile a little bit, but it's of its time. Whatever you say, there's just some fantastic melodic virtuoso guitar playing on this, and as I say, it sort of validated for me anyway, validated the way that I approach playing the guitar in that, when I want to do a little bit of twiddly bits, as I call them. So that is why Surfing with the Alien is on the list. Fantastic album, so it is. Next,
Asia.
Yes, another one that I will never ever tire of hearing, the debut album from Asia, self-titled. Apparently I wasn't aware of this, but, apparently there was a big buzz of excitement about this band, when was it, 82, when they sort of came out. Because it was like this big supergroup featuring members of, Yes and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff. And I just, again, it's an album I heard because it was being played a lot in the shared student accommodation when I was at college. And it just really got under my skin. And I have to say that, other albums by this band, certainly the second one, what was it called? Alpha, I think it was, just not as good. It's just all a bit schmaltzy kind of power ballady kind of stuff. But this one, there's just such a breadth of tracks on here. The production is amazing, just the way it all dovetails together and sounds like, a bunch of guys having fun. And I think that is often the case with an album. You can tell when an album is being enjoyed by the people who are making it, that you can feel the sort of warmth and good atmosphere in the studio as they're playing. And then when that album is a big hit, suddenly there's a lot more pressure on to do a follow-up, and maybe it's not quite as much fun for the people involved. Whatever is the reason, I think this is a fantastic album. Great songs, great musicianship, fantastic production, just the whole package. And like pretty much all of these albums on this list, it's got happy memories of the days when I was a young man with hair. So that's that one. Next,
Back in Black.
Yes, indeed. I mean, AC/DC. Now, I said earlier on that I'd sort of got into a little bit of rock music in the late 70s, and one of the albums that I was introduced to by basically one of my friend's older brothers was Highway to Hell. And it was, to me, that was just a fantastic foot stomping rocking album, And then, of course, Bon left us, and there was, a lot of were AC/DC going to continue? And of course they did. And along comes Geordie, Mr. Brian Johnson. Obviously, he used to be in a band called Geordie, which I remember them in the charts with a song called Electric Lady, if anybody else remembers that, back in the early 70s. What was on one of those K-Tel compilation albums I had. But anyway, I digress. Along this album comes, and man, it had some big shoes to fill, and it didn't half kind of do it well. It was just to not like this album, I think you just got to kind of check that you've got a pulse. It's just such a feel-good album. You Shook Me All Night Long. What a track, what a fantastic track. And then, Back in Black and Shoot to Thrill, and just the whole package. Fantastic, fantastic album. I love it in 10-foot tall letters. It always makes me smile. I can be in the foulest mood possible. I put this album on, and by the time I've got to the end of it, I've always got a big cheesy grin on my face. So that's why that one deserves a place on the list again, because of, as much as anything else, because of the happy memories that it brings me. So there you go. Those are by no means the best or the most influential or the most groundbreaking albums of guitar albums of the 80s. They just happen to be the top 5 from my collection. The 5 that I like the most today. Ask me again next week, it might be slightly different, but who knows? I don't think it would change that much. Let me know what your favourite 5 guitar-based albums are from the 80s in the comments below. I love reading, all of the kind of stuff that you chaps come up with, and you'll probably end up, somebody at some point will end up reminding me of one that I should have picked for my list and didn't, but there you go. Such is life. And that is pretty much it for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed the video, found it reasonably entertaining, and if you have, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already done so. And why not give me a like while you're at it? Don't forget the live stream, Friday 5 PM UK time, where we drink beer and talk about music and guitars. It's a fantastic way to kick off the weekend, and I would love to see you there if you can make it. But for now, I'll bid you all a good day and say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Look after yourselves, folks. Stay well, stay safe, and above all, stay sane. Bye for now.